is the question of, back to the old book title, The Suitable Enemy, that Ketil Brun and I wrote far back in time. It is clear that in the US, as here, one of the useful functions of the image of the drug addict, and that this is important to fight, is to make it, to convert the situation from being a situation on social conflicts, differences between rich and poor, and you can hide a lot of misery by the hypothesis that it is because of the drugs. Mm-hmm. So if you take that explanation away from the ordinary discussion, then you are naked when you want to preserve the conditions with social differences and all that. So here, I think, hopefully, this will have a fantastic effect, that we really will face class differences instead of drugs.
Well, well, go ahead.
And the second is, of course, that there are lots of people earning very, very good money today. So the real opponents to legalization or changes, that will be the people in the black market. Mm-hmm. So we must expect a lot of
well, so I would say two things. With respect to the first question, the other major change that partially overlaps with marijuana, but it's much broader, is the shift. Is the shift in the African American, because we still have the problem of the church, the black church, especially in the South, which is still so conservative, moralistic, and hypocritical in many ways. But the growing realization that, their view typically has been, we understand the dangers and traumas of drugs like nobody else. Our people are the most vulnerable to drug addiction. We are the ones most devastated by it. We are the ones, and their response in the past was to call in government to try to prevent the drugs. And they were also most likely to accept the conspiracy theory, that if the government could really keep these drugs out of America, or out of our communities if they wanted to, right? Instead of thinking that this is a market force and it will get where it's going to get. But now there's a change. It's most typified. Jesse Jackson, our famous American black politician, when I first started, he was like my opponent, the debate opponent, right? He is now basically saying the same stuff. There's first the young black leadership, now the older black leadership. I spoke to an audience of 300 black ministers in January. There's this beginning of saying, here we locked up millions of young black men and women. And when all was said and done, the drugs were just as available, just as much drugs, just as much, it did not work. So the realization that as much as they hate drugs, so the potential for addressing, in other words, the suitable enemy. So long as black leadership was willing to give its blessing to the war on drugs, it blessed the suitable enemy notion. The more that they say, now I don't want to just put it on them, because it's much broader than just black people, right? But that was incredibly important and symbolically important. That shifts to the extent that black leadership says, this is no longer the war we want, and we want something fundamentally different, it undermines the ability, many right-wing politicians know that, the economic policies they advocate are totally contrary to the interests of most black and white, middle class and poor people. Therefore, you appeal to them by appealing to their sense either of God, right, Christian, or fear, right? Fear about children, fear about race. And so it's always been that effort where, like, Republican and Democratic drug warriors could go into the minority communities and appeal. That's beginning to drop. It still has a long way to go. And your second thing, in terms of the financial interests behind the drug war, I don't think it's going to be the drug gangs. and the drug gangsters. You know, people said right before the repeal of alcohol prohibition, they said Al Capone and the famous, you know, gangsters and bootleggers, they'll never allow it. But in the end, they were almost irrelevant, right? The most powerful force against reform is the prison industrial complex. I mean, when you lock up 2.4 million people, when you have another 5.4 million people under the supervision of parole and probation, when this system now employs hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people directly, and then indirectly more, when it's $100 billion a year economic activity just in pure government dollars, not counting related costs, it's tremendous force. Now, as I said, in 2008, we have, I don't know if you have in Norway, the way you either can change a law, there's two ways to change a law. Well, there are three ways. There's the courts, but the courts are not going to do anything. The courts will only change when the public opinion changes. The second way, the normal way, is through the legislature, state legislature or national legislature. The third way is through the citizens' initiative, a ballot initiative. Do you have that in Norway?
No.
What? Now, so we have a ballot initiative process that exists in roughly half of the United States, about 25 states, mostly in the West. And that's the way, when public opinion is more advanced than the politicians, you can change it. That's how we legalize medical marijuana. We had a ballot initiative in 2008 that would have been the biggest prison and drug reform in the history of the country. It would have reduced the number of people behind bars. We would have reduced our prison population by 25,000 people, just non-violent drug and other offenders. We would have shifted $1 billion a year from prison and parole to treatment and rehabilitation, right? I mean, it was basically all the extra. The prison guards union put in $2 million, raised millions of dollars, and they beat us. Right? And so the prison guards union, you know, and the police sometimes, I mean, they are arguing not just to arrest more people and incarcerate more people, but also they will argue against needle exchange. They will argue against overdose prevention, harm reduction programs. Would you know the thing in it? The most venal, most influential force defending the drug war now is not about money. The most proactive, committed supporters of the drug war in America, it's not about money. It's the prosecutors. It's the prosecutors. And that's about power. That's about power. The prosecutors who say if we have tough laws, it makes it easier for us to have a drug dealer or a drug user become an informant. It means that, you see, our system is probably very different than yours. But it means the tougher the law, the more we can force them to provide information upon other people. The more we can force them to plead guilty and not go to trial. The more we can do this. And basically, it's also just about power for power's sake. In America, for the last 20 years, prosecutors are never held accountable. If an innocent person is convicted and put on death row, and it turns out that the prosecutor withheld information or did not, there's no consequences for prosecutors, right? If they, I mean, and from a budgetary perspective, the prisons officials, at least they have to think, we only have this much money for prisons, that means we can only take so many people or the prisons are too full, and it's dangerous for prison guards. For prosecutors, if they say, give that person 3 years or give that person 20 years, it's not their money. They don't care. So I think that's where the real power comes from, the